Thank you, Marsha. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you everyone for being here. This is a great opportunity for me to present here. I recently graduated from McGill School of Social Work, and today's presentation is part of my doctoral research. This research is funded by SSHRC as well as the FRQSC in Quebec. I am very glad that my PhD supervisor, Professor Jill Henley, is co-authoring this proposed chapter. Jill is an associate professor at the McGill School of Social Work and working with immigrant and refugees for more than 20 years. This study examined the prevalence of asset poverty among immigrants in Canada. We also looked at which group of immigrants are more vulnerable to experience asset poverty and face more challenges in asset accumulation over time in Canada. In the proposed book chapter, we address one important question, and that is, are immigrant families in Canada resilient to manage financial shock, or how much and how readily this household can maintain the consumption standard during a financial crisis, if the family loses its income. So here I will discuss briefly the background of the research and the literature review, and then we'll present some key findings. Several studies showed that immigrants in Canada are consistently overrepresenting among the poor. However, most poverty studies on immigrants in Canada have been based mostly on income measures, which define poverty as the insufficiency of income to meet the basic needs. However, several scholars argue that economic condition of a family depends not only on its income but also on its asset holding. So when we are making the assessment of who is poor and economically vulnerable, household income and assets both are important indicators. A large number of empirical studies showed that importance of assets for immigrants or overall families. Assets are important to cover unexpected expenses such as medical emergencies, job loss, pay mortgage, home repair, or to invest in education and training to improve the skills for the competitive labor market. During financial hardship, assets could be converted into cash to replace income. Past studies have shown that asset holding affect both short-term and lifelong well-being of household and individuals. For example, asset can help families during the economic hardship like the COVID-19 pandemic, when thousands of families lost their jobs or thousands of small businesses are closed. A family who holds some asset can survive the financial shock, or can recover quickly from the shock, or can avoid the shock altogether. Also, several studies have documented that assets play a very key role in the overall economic well-being that directly influence immigrants' ability to integrate successfully in the host society. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first study that estimated immigrants' poverty from an asset perspective and provides some new insights about immigrants' poverty, asset holdings, and economic integration in Canada. So very briefly, for this project, we have used the Survey of Financial Security 2012 and 1999, and from Statistics Canada. The SFS provide information from a sample of Canadian families on their asset, debts, employment, income, and education. The SFS covered the population living in 10 provinces, which represent almost 98% of the population. The interview was conducted with the family member most knowledgeable of the family's financial situation. The asset and debts were collected for the family unit as a whole, not for each person in the family. We also use the longitudinal survey of immigrants to Canada 2007. LC collected information on immigrants at 3 stages after their arrival in Canada, about 6 months, 4 years after their arrival, 2 years after their arrival, and also 2 and 4 years after their arrival, sorry. So in stage 3, 7,716 immigrants were surveyed, but we only focused on the working age immigrants, so our sample size was 4,443. To measure asset poverty, we created financial asset poverty threshold and net worth poverty threshold, because net worth is the indicator of long-term economic security of families, and financial assets are an indicator of emergency fund availability because they can be easily converted to cash. In this study, low income cutoff was used, or LICO was used as a basic needs threshold. Okay, so a financial asset includes all the checking and savings account, term deposits, investments in mutual funds, bond, stocks, registered saving plans, and other durable assets. Net worth was calculated as the total value of all financial asset plus non-financial asset plus business equity and minus total liabilities or debts. Non-financial asset included principal residence or like home, other real estate assets, and vehicles. In this study, a household is considered as asset poor if it does not have sufficient asset to survive at the low income cutoff for 3 months. The 3 months was chosen based on the proposition that a financially secured household should own sufficient asset to meet the basic needs for 3 months. Previous studies has used this 3 months period. We will present some key findings of this study. So we can see in the graph that more than 50% of immigrants and Canadian-born households are estimated to be in financial asset poverty in 2012. However, regardless of poverty measure, the headcount poverty rates were higher for immigrants than the Canadian-born. Although the gap of financial asset poverty between these two groups was small, compared to the Canadian-born, income poverty rate of immigrants were almost double, and net worth poverty rate was 1.5 times greater. Okay, in terms of regional differences, results show that immigrants' financial and net worth poverty rates were higher in Quebec than any other region. We did not show in this graph, but we found that Quebec has the highest income poverty rates of immigrant household, followed by British Columbia. Here we compare the asset poverty rates between years. The graph is showing that the poverty rate in both years were highest for immigrants with the financial asset definition. Although it remains high, financial asset poverty rates have gone down over the years for immigrant household. However, the income and net worth poverty rates have increased over time. The multivariate logistic regression model predicted financial asset poverty, net worth poverty of immigrants in 2012. By focusing on immigrant families based on their country of origin, we found that immigrants from Middle East and North Africa were the most at risk of being financial asset poor in comparison to the reference group North American immigrants. However, immigrants born in East Asia and Pacific and Europe and Central Asia were at less risk of being financial asset poor. Regarding net worth poverty, compared to the reference group North America, immigrants from every regional category besides Europe and Central Asia were at risk of asset poverty. Immigrants from South Asia were at the highest risk of net worth poverty compared to any other groups. Controlling for other factors. The number of children in the household statistically significantly increase the risk of being income and asset poor, which means that the larger households with children experience higher income and asset poverty. Asset poverty is more prominent in households with younger adults and immigrants who are in the prime working age. In particular, net worth poverty was considerably higher for these age groups. The results suggest that economic vulnerability in the earlier stage of life cycle was significantly higher for immigrants. Also, the financial asset poverty risk is higher for immigrants who are residing in Canada for less than 15 years. In contrast, regardless of measures, living in a married family, home ownership, and higher level of education, that means university degrees, reduce the chance of experiences asset poverty. So our asset portfolio analysis showed that the principal residence, that means home, was the largest portion of the total asset holding in the non-financial asset category. It's almost 61%. So we examined the disparities in asset accumulation, focusing on home ownership, and looked into how the factors that explains asset poverty affects asset accumulation of immigrants. Results showed that overall homeownership rate of immigrants in Canada increased by 16 percentage points in the first 2 years and 14 percentage points between 2 and 4 years after arrival. Although homeownership rate increased over the years, more than 50% of immigrants were not living in owner-occupied accommodation. We found that the homeownership rates are not consistent across immigrant groups. I mentioned earlier that homeownership reduces the risk of being in asset poverty. However, for some immigrants, homeownership could be very challenging. For example, homeownership rates are lower for Arab, Black, and West Asian immigrants compared to other ethno-racial groups. By focusing on immigrants based on their country of origin, again, we found that North America, Oceania, and Australia, South and Central America, and Europe are the front runner of home ownership. However, immigrants from Africa and the Middle East are the most vulnerable group. Immigration status showed that compared to economic class immigrants, family class immigrants significantly increase the likelihood of home ownership. This is because they may receive help from their already established family members or relatives who have been in Canada for the past several years. A series of multivariate logistic regression models showed that income, employment, savings in their home country, and stable financial situation contribute to homeownership over time. We found that higher number of children in the household increase the likelihood of being homeowners. This suggests that immigrants desire to be homeowner despite financial hardship when they have children. So we are almost at the end of the presentation. How poverty is defined has a profound influence on how poverty is addressed. This study showed that asset poverty rates of immigrants in Canada are remarkably high in contrast to rates of income poverty. We also see the unequal distribution of asset among groups. So more than 50% of immigrant households are financial asset poor, and also they're struggling very much to hold long-term assets. So Canada has several asset building policies. For example, we have Canada Pension Plan, Quebec Pension Plan, registered education savings plan, registered retirement savings plan, home ownership subsidies. But these policies may not help immigrant household the way they help the Canadian-born household, because the level of access to resources are different for different groups. Also, immigrants in Canada come from different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds with varying level of resources. As such, need of these groups might be very different. Because almost 22% of Canadian population is immigrant, we need to think and consider the diversity of needs of immigrant experiencing income and asset poverty in this country. One asset building approach may not work for every population or group. So policies and practice need to pay close attention to relevant factors such as age, ability, gender, family structure, immigration status, race and ethnicity, and most of all, language preference while developing programs for families who are living in poverty and low income. So I would stop now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nahid, for discussing how family assets and family resources influence immigrant families' capacity to deal with financial difficulties, and especially for focusing on different social and economic factors that shape their ability to